The first volume of Joshua Williamson's Superman series is a great reintroduction to the Man of Tomorrow. The series captures the fundamental aspects of the characters while also showcasing how the world has changed and the status quo has shifted. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys think of this opening installment of the new Superman series. I'm Brennan for the New Wave Nerds. Subscribe down below for more nerd content and commentary. Now let's roll the intro. Superman Volume 1 Supercorp, Superman has returned to Metropolis, and his greatest enemy, Lex Luthor, is finally behind bars. The future of the Superman family has never been brighter. As Clark Kent settles back into his life, iconic and new enemies erupt from the shadows to strike down the Man of Steel. But waiting in the wings to back up Big Blue is Supercorp? What secret project has Lex given to Superman? This all-new chapter ushers in an iconic age of the DCU with a story that welcomes new readers and delights long-time fans. The first volume collects the first 5 issues of the new Superman series and is written by Joshua Williamson and illustrated by Jamal Campbell. Now, as always, we're going to begin with a brief non-spoiler review. I think this is really good. I think it's a fun, again, like I said, reintroduction to the character. As far as first issues go, I think it is really, really well done. The writing of Joshua Williamson here is fantastic. And after reading these first couple issues, it is clear. Now, this is not the first work that Joshua Williamson has done on Superman, but it's easy to see why he has stuck around to this day. Now, I think he's going on 2 years. We just read Superman number 25, I think 25 is the most recent one, but it's easy to see why he has stuck around after this such a strong reintroduction. There are obviously things about this comic that I don't like. There are things about the whole series that I really don't enjoy, things that I don't think have paid off very well. But that being said, this does feel like Superman. There have been lots of comics that I've read throughout the years that haven't really felt like Superman, even though they've had the name on them. And I do want to commend Joshua Williamson here for the great writing. And of course, if you've listened to my review of this ongoing Zatanna series, then you know how I feel about Jamal Campbell's art. It's absolutely amazing. I had read the first volume of this before I'd read Zatanna, and I thought it looked good. But Zatanna was the series that really got his name stuck in my brain, and I can't wait to see what else he does in the future. Now, before we get into the spoiler section here, I'm going to politely ask you all to head on over to patreon.com/newwavenerds. We've got all kinds of different benefits, all kinds of different tiers that have various benefits. If you like the work that we do here and want to help us make these videos look and sound even better, then that is the place to go. And we're doing a patron series, or rather a patron drive, where when we get 15 new patrons or $50 total, which just about covers the back-end mechanical aspects and subscriptions that we have to make this work, we're going to be releasing a very special 12-part video series where we take a look at DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths. So again, if you enjoy what we do here and want to help us make this even better, head on over to patreon.com/newwavenerds. Now, let's get into the spoiler section. So like I said, I think as far as a reintroduction goes, I think the series is incredibly well structured and incredibly interesting of reintroducing all of the old characters, recontextualizing some of the old characters, and showing how, like I said, the status quo has been shifted. Things are not the same. Like the synopsis mentioned, Lex Luthor is behind bars. How does Superman react to that? It does a very, very good job here in setting up the relationship between these two characters and what it's going to be like for them in the series moving forward. Specifically, I think the first issue is very, very well done. I think it pulls you in immediately because you're questioning what's going on. Even if you haven't read Superman in the years before this, you come in and you're like, okay, these are all the familiar characters I know. Everybody feels like they are themselves. But what's happening in the world? Everything has shifted, and I think it does a great job of sort of leading into that and making it an integral part and reintroducing it. I think it's really, really well done. This is probably the beginning of the most recent Superman stuff that I've read. I didn't read I wasn't reading Superman until I didn't start again until October when the Absolute Universe was released, and then that's when I really got back into comics. So I didn't really know what was going on when I first read this, and the comic explained it all very beautifully. I didn't feel like I had any questions. I didn't feel like there were dangling threads or anything like that. So I think it's a very, very strong place to start, and it's a very good issue number 1. Now, as I mentioned in the non-spoiler review, we have to talk about Jamal Campbell's art here. It is so, so beautiful. Not only does he pencil the issue, he inks it as well. So I can't imagine the amount of time that it would have taken him to do all of this. But it is so beautiful. The line work here is stunning. It feels, I don't know, what's the proper word that I want to use here? Transcendent, I guess. I don't know. This is the type of art style that I think maybe not everybody, but 5-10 years ago, or 5-10 years from now, I'm going to be looking back at some of my favorite modern comic book artists, and Jamal Campbell is going to be there. Everything is so clean, and yet it doesn't feel like fake or plastic. It almost feels like a painting of sorts, not necessarily like, it's not painted in the same way that like Alex Ross's art is painted, but it just gives that same feeling to me, at least. I think it's very, very beautiful. And like I said, I can't wait to see what else this guy has got coming down the pipeline. It's just so beautiful. And the fact that he pencils it and inks it is really amazing to me. Like I said, I can't imagine the amount of time that would be. But the coloring on some of these panels is absolutely amazing. Like there's a scene in, I think this might be the first issue, but it might be the second. It's shortly after Superman leaves the Supercorp building, and he is flying through the air. And the way that it is colored is so beautiful. The contrast between the blue and red of Superman's costume with the orange background of the sunrise. It's very, very beautiful. The way that Jamal Campbell plays with light here is so fascinating. I think it's really, really good, and I can't recommend picking up some of his work if you're unfamiliar. There's a series, which now I can't remember what it's called. I was just looking at it yesterday, which is written and illustrated by him, which isn't Zatanna. It was a couple years old. Oh, and I'm not going to be able to find it. I don't know. It's not important. In any case, look up his work. This isn't the one I was thinking of, but he also did the art for the Far Sector series, which introduces a new Green Lantern, Joe Mullane. And I'm going to be honest, I wanted to read that one because it was very detective-esque and sort of leaned into the whole space cop theme. But now that I know it's illustrated by Jamal Campbell, I'm just that much more interested in going to read it. And so I'm going to probably read that one a lot sooner than I would have. Now, let's get back to Superman here for a minute, because I want to talk a little bit about Lex Luthor. Now, longtime listeners will know that Lex Luthor is one of my all-time favorite villains ever. He is so fascinating and so interesting. And he's interesting, I enjoy villains that have a direct relationship to their counterparts, to the heroes. I love Batman and Joker. I love Kingpin and Daredevil. I love Lex Luthor and Superman. I love Captain America and Red Skull. Wow, that was really embarrassing. It was on the tip. I could see him and I could see Hugo Weaving, but for some reason I couldn't think of his name. But I love those interactions. Batman and Two-Face is another really, really good one. I love when it is two characters who so intimately know each other and understand each other and are two halves of the same coin, right? Joker is the inversion of Batman. Lex Luthor is the inversion of Superman. Superman is an alien who is the best human that there ever was. And Lex Luthor is a human who has the potential to be the best human that there ever was, but has such a big ego and has so much love and hate in his heart for Superman that he can't look past that. And I think this is a series that sort of illustrates that in a really, really interesting way, because Lex Luthor here is sort of nominally like attempting to do good. Like he's communicating with Superman, trying to get him to come around to Lex Luthor's way of doing things, because Lex Luthor wants to help humanity. It's just that he wants to help humanity, and Superman's not a human in his eyes, right? And so it's really, really interesting. There's a line in maybe it's The Last Son of Krypton by Jeff Johns, or maybe it's the Luthor Man of Steel series by Brian Azzarello. I can't remember now. I've read too many Superman comics recently. But there's a line where they address the fact that like Lex Luthor has the intelligence, the wealth, the ability to do nothing but make Earth as close to a paradise as it can be. You know, he can cure cancer, he can feed the starving, he can do all of this stuff. I think it's Last Son of Krypton. Because I vaguely remember the Gary Frank art there. Or maybe it's Adam Kubert. No, I'm getting too deep in the weeds and confusing myself. I think Adam Kubert just does the covers. I don't know. Not important. But there's a line where Lex Luthor is like, I will do these things. I can do these things. I'm going to do these things, but not until Superman's gone, right? It's the fact that he is the peak of humanity in the best and the worst ways possible. Lex Luthor is the extent of human intelligence. Lex Luthor, in my opinion, is the smartest person in the entire DC universe. He is the extent of intellect, but he's also the extent of greed and ego and pride and all of this. He is the best and worst of humanity, and Superman is the best of humanity, with some added alien trappings, because of course he can fly. But it's very, very interesting, and I think this series sets it up really well, and I like the way that they introduce Luthor here, in that he is in prison and Superman is hearing his voice. And over the course of the first couple issues, it might be the first or it might be the second, I don't know, it's very early on, but Superman goes to the roof and he's talking with Lois Lane, and he's talking about how he has spent his life learning how to focus in on specific people's voices, the people who are the most important to him, to learn if they ever need help, if they are in danger, or if they need to communicate him, if they need his help, or if he needs their help. He knows where they are, can go to them. And some of those people are, Lois and John Kent, his son. Lois adds in Bruce, and then finally Lex Luthor. And so Luthor is in prison. And there's a great scene where we cut to him and Luthor's talking to Superman, but of course nobody knows what's going on. And one of the guards is like, quit talking like that or they're going to send you to Arkham. And Superman is just able to hear him. He's just able to hear this incessant tone of Lex Luthor in his ear being like, think of how many people died while you stood here and had this dumb conversation with Lois and Jimmy. Think of how many people. Think of how much good we could do together. And it's really, really interesting. And especially when we get to his part in the end. The way that we end the final issue is the villains, who I'm going to go into in a little bit here. The villains basically cause Superman to lose his hearing, so he can't hear Lex Luthor. And Lex is in prison, obviously unaware of the fact that Superman can't hear him, but he's still talking to him. And he's saying things like, I must admit, working with you in these months has filled me with a different feeling than I've had before. He feels good that he's doing good. And he's saying things that are basically like admitting that Superman has sort of helped turn him into a better man. And then another inmate rounds the corner and shivs Lex Luthor right in the stomach. And Lex Luthor goes down, and he's on the ground, he's bleeding out, and he says in a whisper Superman, save me. But he can't hear. It's very interesting. It's super cool. And of course, I've read further on. I'm up to date on all the Superman stuff, so I know like where Lex Luthor's story goes. And so I know that there's retcon isn't necessarily quite the right word, although it is technically accurate for what happens here. It does open some questions as to the what am I trying to say here? The like truthfulness, the candor of Lex Luthor's statement here at the end. It does call some of that into question, but I like to imagine that he really did mean what he was saying. He was feeling this level of fulfillment after working alongside Superman. I like to imagine that at this point he was starting to become a better man. Maybe that's not true. Maybe upon rereading, the second time for this series of reviews, I'll be like, oh, it's pretty obvious that he didn't make the change until an event that I'm not going to talk about in this review because we'll be discussing it in the coming weeks. But I think it's really interesting. And of course, I'm biased. I love Lex Luthor. He's a terrible man, but I love to read stories where he's there. And this series does a great job of playing off the dichotomy between him and Superman. I think it's so fun. And I can't see where Williamson takes him in the issues that are yet to be released. Not the ones necessarily after this, because we already know what happens. But from 26 on, I think is the next issue. Now, I also want to talk again, sort of keeping in theme with the fact that like these characters are the same. They have their fundamental aspects. They have the thing which makes them them, but the status quo has shifted. And another great example of that is Lois Lane. Lois Lane has always been, this hard-nosed reporter who is always out to get the truth. And now she has become the editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet. And it's really interesting to see like her struggle with that, where she wants to be the one going out and doing the news. She doesn't like to be stuck behind the desk. There's a really great panel in here. And it's just another testament, I think, to the fun of Jamal Campbell's art. But Superman and Lois are in the Daily Planet building, and Lois is talking about how being in the office like feels like a cage, and she says, I pulled it up here. She says, "I'm a predator. I gotta hunt for a story, and I have to hunt for a story, or I'm gonna eat an intern." And the panel is really funny. It's got there's red overtones. It's like Lois is like lashing out. She's basically snarling, holding on to Clark's tie and pulling him in, and Clark is just smiling on the left side. I like to imagine that he's sitting here thinking, Lois, you're so cute. It's so great. It's a panel that really sort of encapsulates like the relationship between these two. Like they understand each other. Clark knows that Lois wants nothing more than to be out on the ground, but he knows that she is the best person for the job. There's nobody else who would be able to do editor-in-chief after Perry White leaves. It's really fascinating, really interesting, really beautiful, really, really beautiful. I love throughout this whole series, and this is not just this volume, but it's all of Joshua Williamson's works thus far. I love the relationship between Clark and Lois. It feels so genuine. There are sometimes some comics and some movies where I feel like the relationship between these two is forced. But in these issues, it really comes off as natural, as like true love. And I am a huge fan of that. Clark and Lois are the couple of the entire DC universe. I might even go so far as to say they are like one of the couples in all of nerdy fiction. I think the only one that comes close is like Aragorn and Arwen. And you can't really go for that because Arwen's barely in the book. She's barely on screen. It's just sort of passing. But it's like the fundamental aspect of these two characters. It's so good. I love it. And I'm curious how Lois is. Again, I'm not going to get too spoilery about things that have just happened in the recent comics. I'm curious to see where Lois goes. And I'm just going to leave it there. If you haven't read the current stuff, I'm not going to spoil it for you. Maybe once they release a trade for that volume, we'll do a review of that. Because by that point, enough time has passed. But I'm not going to talk about it here. So I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about the villains. And I do want to just take a moment here and say that in this volume, I do think the actual villain aspect of it is a little underdeveloped. It's a little underdeveloped. Now, again, moving forward, I know what's going to happen because I've read those issues. And so I know that the quote-unquote villains here are actually, I mean, their role here is just to set up the next volume, which I think is leads to a sort of interesting villain in its own right. But the main antagonists for this series, or for this volume, are Dr. Farm and Graft. Now, their backstory, I'm not necessarily huge on. The way it's introduced as far as the actual comic panels and pages go, I do think is interesting because it's the final page of an issue, and Lex is saying, things are going to get crazier. This is a paraphrase, if you can't guess. He's like, things are going to get wild, buddy, because we're not dealing with your villains, we're dealing with mine. And that's the end of the issue. I think it's done really well. And then in the next issue, we see the origin of these villains, and it ties into the origin of Lex Luthor. In short, he comes to Metropolis, and when he first comes here, he's very idealistic, and so he becomes like the city's first superhero. And some of his first major villains are this Dr. Farm and Graft. Now, like I said, narratively, I don't really like that. I don't like the idea that Lex Luthor was a hero in the beginning. Maybe he was. I'm fine with the idea that like he was idealistic and he was trying to be the hero that the city needed, but I don't need him to put on an actual costume and put together gadgets and go actively fight crime. I much more like the idea that, maybe he still views himself as the hero and he's trying to be the savior of the city, but he does it in the best way that he knows, which is like creating technology and creating what will soon become LexCorp and so on and so forth. So that part I don't necessarily like, but the villains themselves I think are kind of interesting, but like I said, they just feel kind of underdeveloped. Like there's lots of things that we see here that I don't know if they get resolved. They don't really get resolved here in the issue, and it's been a while since I read it, since at least we did like the Superwoman special review, which was quite a while ago. But I don't know if some of these things really come back in later issues and in later volumes. So I think by and large, the villain is kind of underdeveloped, but the name of the volume isn't, Farm and Graft. The name of the volume is Supercorp, right? Like the main problem, I guess, that Superman is trying to address and solve here isn't the fact that these villains exist, isn't really what's going on. It's how does he work with Supercorp? Does he work with Supercorp at all? And by the end of the issue, he decides, okay, look, this thing is here. I'm going to use it for good. But that's the main function of the story is, does Superman trust Lex to use this company? Does he think Lex is doing a long game, or can he use Supercorp? Can he use Lex's genius for good? And that's sort of the main function here. And that, as a story aspect, I do like. I think Supercorp in general, I'm still a little hesitant on. And maybe it's just because of the fact that we have I don't like that there's a massive skyscraper in the center of Metropolis that has the Superman emblem flying over the city. Maybe it's just the visual of it that I'm not so sure on. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it. But there is a really, really interesting interaction in this, where again, I think Superman is talking to Lois, and he says that sometimes he feels like Lex is the only person that he's ever given up on. And I think that that's really, really powerful. And again, sort of hits at like the fundamental core of their relationship, is that Superman always sees the best in people, even people who have tried to kill him literally hundreds upon hundreds of times. But he still knows or thinks or believes or hopes that there is good in Lex, and he is constantly trying to bring that out. And again, I think that hits at the core of what Superman is. It hits at the core of his relationship with Lex Luthor. I think it's really, really well done. Like I said, I can't really commend the writing of Joshua Williamson here enough. I think it's great. I'm, like I said, super curious to see like how this continues moving forward, especially with some of the other stuff that we've got going on in the Superman universe. I think it's either this week. No, it's at the time of this recording, it will be like already. It will have already come out. But now Dan Slott is doing a new miniseries called Superman Unlimited, which is going to affect the universe because it's going to basically mean there's kryptonite everywhere. And what is that going to mean for Joshua Williamson's run? How do these themes play out that we've been exploring from the beginning with Lois and with Lex and all of this with Mercy Graves? I don't know, but I'm really curious. I'm really excited, and I can't really recommend this. I mean, as far as modern Superman stories go, I do think that this is probably one of the best that I've read. I think it's great, and I think it's worth picking up. It's available, again, collected in a trade. It collects the first 5 issues, which was the basis for this video, and that's available at your local comic book store, on digital marketplaces, on I think it's actually available on DC Universe Infinite as a trade. So definitely go pick it up. I really like it, and I think you will like it as well. Now, that's where we're going to end things out, so let's take a look at what we've got coming down the pipeline soon here. Next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about Man of Steel, which is obviously the Henry Cavill Superman, the beginning of the DCEU. And then Thursday, we'll be back to talk the second volume of Joshua Williamson's Superman series, The Chained. Dun, dun, dun. What does that mean? Oh, I guess you'll have to wait until next week to find out. Smooth, wasn't that? Anyways, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going off the rails here. It's been a very long day. I'm tired, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little loopy, I guess. But in any case, again, comment down below. Let me know what you think about this series. If you think that this was a strong beginning of the new Superman series, or if, like me, you kind of felt that the villain was a little underdeveloped and there's some things that could have done work or could have used some work. Let me know down below. Make sure that you subscribe and hit the notifications bell so that you never miss another episode. And I will see you back on Tuesday to talk more Superman.